In today's video, I'm heading off to the Science to Sport lab here in Girona to have a bike fit with WorldTour bike fitter John Wakefield. John has been the performance director at Team UAE for the past 4 years and is this year working with Team Bora Hansgrohe. He famously helped Tadej Pogacar to his 2 Tour de France victories, including being one of the minds behind Tadej's first Tour de France win with that insane time trial on stage 20 of the 2020 Tour de France. John now works with Team Bora Hansgrohe while simultaneously running Science to Sport here in Girona. Science to Sport is a performance lab that helps amateur and professional athletes with bike fitting, performance coaching, and directing to become the best cyclists they can be. So I'm going to grab my bike and I'm going to roll over to Science to Sport. I'm going to have a chat with John and I'm going to ask him some questions that might be able to help you guys with your bike fitting as well. This is my bike fit with WorldTour bike fitter John Wakefield. Let's get into it. Alrighty, so I'm standing here with John Wakefield here at Science to Sport in the centre of Girona. Today, John is going to rate my bike fit and give me a new one. I don't think it's that far out, but we're going to find out. Before we jump into the bike fit, I just want to ask John a couple of quick questions. The first one I want to ask you is, can you just tell me the background to Science to Sport and your involvement with Science to Sport and also your involvement with professional cyclists that give you the credibility to do this kind of fitting and testing?
Sure. Science to Sport originated in South Africa in 2008. There's 5 directors. Basically, our main form is obviously performance coaching. We have over 500 athletes throughout our books, and another big part of our repertoire of services is biomechanics and testing. We also have an education system, and additionally to that, we do performance analysis on teams and athletes, etc.
Yeah, wow, okay. So you do quite a range of things with Science to Sport. Obviously, you have a very close link with working with some really high quality athletes. You've worked with UAE in the past and now you're currently working with Bora Hansgrohe. So working with UAE during 2020 when there was that quite famous Tour de France victory that happened on the last day, John had quite an involvement in that. Can I just ask you quickly, because that's the one that springs to my mind, can you tell me a little bit about your involvement with UAE and in particular that Tour de France and Tadej's first Tour de France win?
Yeah, so last 4 seasons I was with UAE. I was there, one of the performance coaches and the performance coordinator. For that Tour de France, I was part of the team, which was myself, Alan Piper, 2 of the riders, and obviously Tadej. We had done a lot of recons on that TT course prior to a camp that we had gone on, and during the tour as things sort of unfolded, and when we realized where we were sitting as a team and what the possibilities are on that day to achieve that sort of night at 11 o'clock, I was sort of crunching numbers and speed values, trying to find out where Tadej could possibly make up time on the TT.
This was 11 p.m. the night before.
Yeah, that was 11 o'clock the night before. Yeah, night before stage 20 when you've had no sleep for 19 days. I'm not saying that I was the reason for it, but everyone put in a lot of input. But yeah, it was a lot of number crunching at 11 o'clock at night and trying to convince that it was definitely possible based on little calculations. But at the end of the day, it came down to Tadej.
Yeah, he did the grunt of the work,
Correct.
Pushing the pedals. Today we're not looking at my performance, but you are going to give me a bike fit. Can you just tell me what sorts of things you're going to be looking at today with fit in relation to myself as an amateur, but maybe a high-level amateur cyclist? What are you looking for in a bike fit and what you think you might change today?
So first off, we'll obviously do physiological measurements. So get your leg length, your flexibility, and see where you are with regards to that. From that, we'll put you onto the bike and do static and kinematics, make sure that those 2 kind of match up together. Should there be changes after subtle pressure mapping and we correlate all those 3, then we see what, if anything, we need to do. And either make you look like a recreational cyclist or a professional.
Or a professional, hopefully more on the professional end. So for you guys, as a little sort of slightly embarrassing backstory for me, I haven't had a bike fit in 5 years. I've had 4 bikes since my last bike fit, and as you guys would know if you've had a couple of bikes yourselves, when you jump onto a new bike, often there are subtle changes that don't get translated. So my bike fit could be way far out. It's worked for me for the last few years, but I think that John can probably help improve that. So let's get on with the bike fit, see if we can make some changes and see how we go. Cool. Alright, so we've just done the first little step, and that's my sort of flexibility and my range of movement in my legs. John was just telling me that I've actually got a bit of a sort of discrepancy there, and I've got some very tight hamstrings.
Yeah.
Okay, can you just explain to me, firstly, what the measurements were there, and then secondly, just explain what you said to me about tight hamstrings and how I might be able to improve?
Yeah, so his straight leg raise of what we had measured was, so we take it on both legs, but we obviously take the lowest value of the two. So he was 71 and 75 degrees. So we capture the 71 degrees.
For reference, 71 is pretty inflexible.
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
So we would consider you having a tight hamstring.
Okay.
So focus should be on getting more flexibility in the hamstring. What we like to see in an athlete or anyone that comes through the lab is sort of 80 and up. So 80 would be our sort of lowest reference.
Okay, so this is my first barrier to becoming a pro cyclist.
Yeah, correct.
More
So
hamstring flexibility.
I think this is what has stopped you going to the tour. Definitely.
Okay, I can work on that though.
Exactly. But yet, when you did sit and reach, you had a positive of a 7 positive in terms of your pelvic rotation. That's a good thing. Typically, we often see a tight hamstring and 0 pelvic rotation, so it's super tight. We see a negative number. So should you be able to put some focus on stretching your hamstring, which will have a big improvement sooner because you have a tight hamstring, you'll have a lot more benefit on the bike in terms of performance and how we are able to or not able to set up your bike.
Okay, so you just said something that I just want to dwell on for a moment. You said, because I've got such tight hamstrings, if I start working on them, they're going to immediately improve versus being very good. It's hard to get that extra couple of percent.
Correct.
Would you say for people at home, if they're looking to improve their flexibility, work out where they're tight and focus on those areas to improve their flexibility, because that's where you see the biggest gain?
Yeah, definitely. You know, it's kind of taking an unfit human and get them to run around the block for 2 weeks. They'll get a big increase in fitness, but you take someone that's in peak form, it's really hard to improve that fitness.
Yeah, these marginal gains at the top level are always hard to make. Okay, cool. Let's keep going on with the bike fit. All right, so what have you found? We've pulled the insoles out of my shoes. Again, this is a bit embarrassing. I've had this set of Superfleet in my shoes, I believe, since 2015. Is that terrible?
Yeah, it's terrible. Like, it's not good.
Immediate improvement to be had there then.
Yeah, definite improvement. What is interesting though is if you look at his sort of at the pattern of the insole, you can see that he's very heavy on that metatarsal and on his big toe. So essentially he's doing a little bit of a crow's foot and crow toes. This is something we'll need to work on, possibly even inserting a wedge, or it might also just be based on improving some muscle like soleus, calf muscle, etc., just to possibly get a correction going here.
Okay, so this is the next
But
barrier.
it also could just be because they're 10 years old. You know, so I may be completely wrong looking at this, but it could just because they're 10 years old.
Okay. All right, so we've really discovered a problem with my shoes here. We've only just done the flexibility. John's having a look at my shoes before I even get on the bike. What have you found now?
That. I think they're as old as your insoles.
This is maybe about 9 months, but as a photographer, the problem is I constantly get off the bike and get back on. So that's a real issue. My cleats are obviously super, super worn. Tell me, a good question, again, for people at home, can you explain what the issue is when your cleats are this fucked?
There's a lot of play. There will be play, so that can potentially create knee pain and discomfort. But also your power delivery can also be wrong or not correct. You know, you've got a significant kind of wear and tear on the right-hand side. So this would typically lend, even though it's a few millimeter, like you will drop to the outside because there just is no stability here. Okay. You know, so you're kind of sitting with a shoe like so.
This is so embarrassing.
But you know, this is like you wanted almost zero play on your cleats, and here you have like a lot of play on your cleats. So you're running the wrong cleats.
So I've got the blue ones on, but they're more like the yellow ones.
Yeah, correct. Whatever comes prior to yellow.
Brown?
Brown, no cleats.
Alrighty, cool. So we've just done, you guys have just done the measurements on the bike. This is the things like saddle height, fore and aft, stem length, handlebar width, all of the basic measurements of the bike. You just said to me that you think it's pretty good. Looking at it, you're eyeballing it, you're pretty happy, and those numbers in the computer, you think it's probably about right?
Yeah, it doesn't look wrong at all. Like when we put your physiological measurements in, it gives us a predicted value. And yes, it's never spot on, but you're definitely not too far off. The one thing which was sort of noticeable was that you're running a much longer reach in front. But again, when you look at that to your setback, you've also moved your setback forward. So not saying it's wrong, but we are looking good. For Tristan's bike fit services, it's not looking bad.
It's not bad. Okay, so we'll go on with the bike fit now. Now you've done the measurements, you're going to actually get me on the bike, and then we're going to talk a little bit about saddle height, fore and aft, things like that.
If we need to make changes, we'll kind of explain why and how and go from there.
All right, cool. So while Mark has been putting these dots on me, John was just looking at the numbers and the values that he input to the computer in terms of my measurement and reach and things like this. There's actually no recommended changes or no real serious changes that you've seen in there. Correct. You said I've been kind of in the ballpark, but you think that maybe I can get some better hip angle to improve my power output and things like that?
Yeah, as Tristan said, his bike fit's actually pretty good for Tristan's bike fit services. The only thing that we have picked up, and especially for the level of riding that Tristan does, is your hip angle is rather open, and what I would like to do is just close his hip angle a bit more so he's a little bit more aggressive on the bike, and we'll get a lot more glute recruitment and a bit more economy on the bike. And that is also something that he had said is, you know, when he subconsciously moves back and closes his hip angle without him really knowing it, he feels a significant improvement in power.
My watt box shows me that I'm doing an extra
that's
10% really.
Minimum of 10. So yeah, it kind of correlates with our findings. So now the job at hand is just to confirm that through the kinematics, and then we try and make those changes for you and try get that in a stable position.
Just another quick question there. So with my hip being quite open, I'm probably one of these people that is on the side of short cranks. I run 165mm cranks. Do you think my hip being open has something to do with the 165mm cranks and the fact that I haven't then compensated for that with saddle setback and things like that? And so my hip is naturally more open. It makes me very comfortable, but you think I could, with those shorter cranks, is what you're saying I can run a more aggressive position and still get away with it?
Yeah, definitely. So, you know, even if you run 165, so even if you ran 170, so it would still work. You run a longer crank, and with your setup as it is now, we'll obviously close hip angle, but we want to sort of do it in a slightly different way and move you sort of a little bit more back on the bike.
So I can keep my beloved 165mm cranks.
That's it. Okay, so now that we've done our 6 static measurements, we now connect to 3D kinematics, which is our SCT camera system, and we just make sure that these angles are exactly what we had found on the previous static, and we correlate the two, and then we do mapping, and then we go from there.
So you've just taken the measurement of me pedaling along, and you're looking at all my sort of range of motion and things like that. That's what the video was doing. Now we're moving into pressure mapping. You said that just then that my fit's actually not too bad, but the pressure mapping is picking up on those tiny little details.
Yeah, sure. So if you had to look at his fit and we do it and everything is good and Tristan says, I feel fantastic, we typically then use pressure mapping at the end of it just to make sure that what we've done on the bike is correct in terms of how he's sitting, in terms of comfort and pressure. And the other side to that is it's almost that sort of last 5-10% just to fine tune that fit. Angles, everything tell us one thing, how someone's sitting on the saddle is something completely different, you know. So we may need to change his saddle based on what we find here.
So although we haven't actually made any changes to the bike yet, specifically not even cleats, nothing, maybe the pressure mapping will show up some details that could be adjusted.
Correct.
So we've just done the pressure mapping. That was super interesting for me. That was just like 2 6-second little grabs of my pressure as I was pedaling along. John was saying and Mark was saying to keep myself in a very stable position, which I tried to do. Yeah. Can you just explain the results you've now seen? You just said to me that this red line is actually very good. And can you just explain the rest of the pressure around that?
Sure. So this is his center point of where he's sitting on the saddle itself. With it being sort of a perfectly straight line, it shows that he is very stable on the bike in terms of how he's sitting. So he's not sitting too much to the left or sitting skew. The only problem is he is a little bit further back from the center of the saddle, and these two, what we would call sort of hot spots, although it's still a very low millibar in terms of pressure, is showing that he has posteriorly rotated pelvis and his center pressure is on his sit bones. And what we'd like to do now is get it to more anterior rotate his pelvis within the changes that we do on the bike foot.
So these two little hot spots as a starting point, that can be improved. But if this was an end point and I had a really bad pressure hot spots, this would actually not be too bad.
Yeah,
but because this is a starting point, you think we can get it even better? And
yeah, I do.
Yeah, cool.
Definitely.
And then just with this red line, obviously, if I was sitting slightly askew, if my position was off,
yeah, it would maybe run diagonally across or just slightly tilted.
Okay.
Depending on how straight you are sitting.
Getting on to the next steps, what is the next steps after you've done this pressure mapping?
I first want to just do some PNF stretching, so just some stretching just to kind of get more elasticity into your hamstrings, just to show you how that alone will change your mapping and your comfort on the bike. And then we'll start investigating how we're going to get your rotation of your pelvis. We'll probably start with dropping your front end ever so slightly. If by dropping the front end, which we still have some availability on that, doesn't make the changes we need or what we're looking at, we'll then start looking at some setback.
Okay, yeah, cool. Let's do that. So while Mark is doing what he's doing in the background there, just tell me, so we just did a bit of stretching, and then a second pressure mapping, and in the second pressure mapping you said that my legs were moving in a good way. Did you feel after that little bit of stretching there was some improvement there?
Yeah, his overall stability on his pedaling was more stable than the previous mapping. What wasn't different was your actual pressure and in terms of how you were sitting on the saddle. So you still had a bit of a posterior rotated pelvis. So yeah, not a huge change or what we would typically see in terms of a change after some stretching like that, but you definitely landed up being a touch more cent on the saddle and have a bit more stability.
And then now Mark is just dropping the stem, you're dropping the front end of the bike down a little bit. That's to get, as you said before, a more aggressive position, maybe just rotate my hips in a different way. You're going to start with that and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, correct.
And just to ask you one quick question, because I've always been interested in this, can you explain, if someone does just get on their bike, slam the stem and be like, I want to be low, aggressive, like it's 2010 or something like this, what kinds of issues might they face if they go too low immediately?
There's a range of problems. One obviously being saddle pressure, which can cause numbness. It could cause longer effects of damage. You can also have too long of a reach. Essentially with too long of a reach, problems, your standard problems coming, pain on your traps, your rhomboid, etc. Some neck pain. The other additional issue is obviously handling of the bike. That is compromised.
Handling of the bike. Okay, so not a good idea to just slam your front end, get a bike fit, have someone make sure it's appropriate to do before you do that.
So should you buy a bike, rather have some play on that steering tube until you have had a bike fit or you've ridden it yourself and you found a sort of happy medium on if you're not going to go for a bike fit, and then start cutting the stem.
Yeah, cool. Good advice. Okay, so 10 mils is gone off there now. Yeah. So just got rid of 10 mils, that 10 mil spacer. I left it there originally when Boris built my bike specifically for the fact that I was going to have this bike fit and I wanted to make sure not to go too low. So it looks pretty good now. Alrighty, so second time around, you've dropped the 10 mil spacer out of the front end there. What did you find in my position when you dropped the 10 mil spacer?
Definitely got that anterior rotation in your pelvis. Your mapping also shows it. These two sort of sit bone hotspots are gone. As you can see, his pressure is good. What we have discovered on the investigation is he's just slightly too aggressive in terms of shoulder reach and hip angle. So what we're going to do, we're going to come back up, meet him halfway and come 5 mil up, and we should be actually good to go from that. Yeah,
and that'll mean that I won't have shoulder pain.
Correct.
I've got more aggressive, but I won't have any shoulder pain.
Correct. So we just get you slightly more aggressive and more economical, and it'll be good.
What I found really interesting, John's just been talking to me off camera while Mark is making a slight setback change to my saddle there. What I found really interesting about what you just said was that it's not actually big changes to the bike that I need made, it's more changes to me. So my flexibility is what needs improving, mainly my hamstring and both legs. So what's interesting about what you guys do is not just going, oh yeah, you need 5 mils in your saddle height and then a few mils back and lower the front end. You actually look at the athlete or the cyclist themselves and tell them how they can improve themselves to perform better on the bike and not just to get the bike to fit better themselves? Is that from a science background, or where does that idea come from?
Going back one step, everything we do as a company is all evidence-based. There's a reasoning why we've done something, even from the biomechanics. It comes down from a lot of research and publications that staff members and stuff have done, and directors. So if we suggest to you and say, hey, let's work on flexibility, we'll give you reasoning why, and there's evidence behind that, as opposed to saying your bike is good and everything lines up in terms of angles. Sometimes it's not the bike and it is the athlete, and if you're not doing your stuff as an athlete, it makes no difference what we do on the bike. You know, that's why a lot of people are continuously looking, going from myself to another fitter, or from that fitter back to myself, and they never find that happy medium. Often it's not the fitter, it's you as the athlete, and sometimes you need to change yourself.
Yeah, so it's as much about getting the bike right as getting yourself right to work in harmony in the complete package.
Yeah, correct.
Going back to the bike fit now, you've just said you're going to put the saddle back just a couple of mils.
Yeah, our front end we've found a happy medium. We've come 5 mil down only, but it's really given us good angles, and Tristan's reported a really good feeling. It's now just a little bit in terms of playing with the setback, and that is just to finalize that pelvic rotation is what we're looking at.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
cool. All right, cool. So we've gone through and done one more sort of reposition there. The saddle's come back a little bit. I sat on the saddle. It wasn't actually quite right, not because that position is not right, but because I'm not right. Can you just explain that a little bit further?
Yeah, so what we had made Tristan do was control and forcefully hold his pelvis in an anterior rotated position, and when we did the mapping, it was actually really good. However, what we did discover as Tristan kept on pedaling is that he didn't have the hamstring flexibility, because he does have tight hamstrings, and he started to again posterior rotate his pelvis. And because we had moved his setback further back, it was exaggerated in terms of the pressure and how he was sitting. So until Tristan works on Tristan, we're going to move it back to the original position of where we were and kind of slowly progress as he goes.
So this all plays into this idea that it's as much about the athlete as it is about the bike fit. You've given me a stretch to do to increase my hamstring stretch and things like that. Now, one thing that I'm interested in, and while Mark is making those changes, I just want to ask you about, we haven't actually adjusted the saddle height. That's because you said saddle height is pretty much spot on. You were happy with it as I brought the bike in. I have always run about the same saddle height, the sort of 685 millimeter saddle height. Saddle height for most people at home is probably the number one thing that people ask about when it comes to bike fit. Can you just explain what some of the issues that might arise if your saddle is a little bit too high or a little bit too low?
Yeah, so originally if it's too high, obviously pressure, saddle sores, numbness, etc., or problems related to that. If it's also too high, you have no glute recruitment, you also have no hamstring recruitment.
So you're losing what?
Yeah, so you're losing power, your power delivery is not adequate, and it's not what it should be. If your saddle is too low, very similar problems, again from a power delivery, but you also can develop knee pain. You kind of essentially just using thighs on the bike, which is not economical, and there's no recruitment of glutes and hamstring.
All right, I think those little changes are made there. Should we go and give it one more try?
Let's rock and roll.
Upside down. That's riding in Australia, and then this is going back to Spain. Alrighty, so bike fit done. Surprisingly to me, we didn't actually change that much stuff. First of all, thanks so much for your time in doing this. This has been quite interesting to me, mainly in the fact that, again, we didn't really change a huge amount as a World Tour bike fitter. Firstly, how do you rate my bike fit? And secondly, are you happy with the changes, and do you think they'll make a difference?
As originally said, when you came in, your fit didn't really look that out to me, which was really good. Changes, although very small, have had quite a positive, big impact. The small changes has worked into a big result. Going forward, we can obviously still make some changes, getting some more hamstring flexibility, but as it stands now, the longest bike fit for the smallest change I think I've ever done.
It's been
fantastic.
Couple of hours here to make 5 mils in the front end. So you're now going to send me a report. What's the final thing after someone comes to Science to Sport and say in this example has a bike fit? You then, what's ongoing after that? You send a report or?
Yeah, so we send a report on the findings and the changes, obviously, so they have that information on why we made the changes with regards to the measurements, that they have that going forward for their own mechanic or their own personal usage. And then we obviously have follow-up. So I typically ask an athlete to ride sort of 2, 3, 4 days. If we've done some big changes, I ask for no specific kind of hard intervals or low cadence work, just in case. But I typically follow up in 3, 4 days, and then if there's a niggle or something, we'll come back in and see what we can do. Additionally to that, I follow up within that month kind of on consecutive breaks and just to make sure that everything is right.
So for me, the things I'm going to go home and do are now, immediately I'm going to change my cleats because I can get more stability there. I'm going to work a bit on my hamstring flexibility.
Correct.
And come back to you hopefully with some good reports. I've got my first stage race of the year this weekend. I'm heading down to Guadalentin tomorrow to race a 3-day stage race. So we'll see how this bike fit goes. Probably generally you wouldn't recommend getting a bike fit 2 days before you do a 3-day stage race, but because we made subtle changes.
Correct. As you said, it's a small change, so I don't see any problems with regards to that. If we had done some significant changes, I would probably have put the bike back to normal and then had you back after the stage race and made those changes.
Again, just want to say thanks so much for your time. This is Science to Sport. You can check out Science to Sport. There's a link to all the details down in the description down there. I'm going to come back, I guess, soon, and we're going to do some performance testing.
And we see where the truth lies.
Yeah, see if I really can go.
If it's just the bike foot problem or if it's you.
I think I know the answer, but you guys will find out next time.
Cool.
All right, we'll see you in the next episode soon. Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
And there
Thanks
you
for listening.